Good evening, and thank you everyone for coming. My name is Jeremy Jackson. I'm the director for the Center of the Study of Public Choice and Private Enterprise and faculty member here in the Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics. The center itself that is sponsoring this lecture series has a mission. I've got it up here on the slide at the moment. The center exists to engage in research and education programs to uncover the institutions and policies that encourage and enhance human well-being. And this is one of our flagship things that we do is we have this Capitalism in Society lecture series. And so thank you again for coming to be a part of this program tonight. You also have the opportunity, if you so like, to see what we're up to on Facebook, Twitter. So we do have a presence there because we have more than just this event happening tonight. We have more events in the future, and Facebook is a great way for you to stay plugged in with all the events that the center has going on. One of the things that we have going on is a reading group that we sponsor. We've titled it the Manser-Olson Scholars Group. Actually, this semester, the students have been reading some readings on entrepreneurship, featuring actually the speaker that we have tonight. Next semester, the topic is going to be the failure of foreign aid. So students have the opportunity to apply for this program. You'll meet about 8 to 10 times throughout the semester to discuss the readings. And as a part of participating in the group, you also qualify for a $500 scholarship, and there's several free meals along the way as well. So if that's something that interests you, you can go to our website and apply for the group for next semester. The application deadline is November 22nd. We do have already planned another lecture like this one for next semester. So on Tuesday, March 6th, we're hosting Dr. Steve Horowitz, who's going to be discussing capitalism and the family. And with that, I want to go ahead and introduce today's speaker. He didn't come to hear me talk. Peter Klein is Caruth Chair and Professor of Entrepreneurship at Baylor University's Hankamer School of Business and Senior Research Fellow at the Boss Center for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise. He is also Adjunct Professor of Strategy and Management at the Norwegian School of Economics and Carl Menger Research Fellow at the Mises Institute. He is author or editor of 4 books and has published over 100 articles, chapters, and reviews. His 2012 book, Organizing Entrepreneurial Judgment with Nikolai Foss, won the 2014 SDAE Fee Best Book Prize. And his 2010 book, The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur, has been translated into both Chinese and Portuguese. Klein's research focuses on the links between entrepreneurship, strategy, and organization, with application to innovation, diversification, vertical coordination, healthcare, and public policy. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Klein.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming out. Can you hear me okay? Mike's good. This is my first trip to North Dakota, my first time to visit Fargo. So it looks like a lovely town. The weather's nice today. I was looking, before I came out, at one of those lists of US states where you can check off all the states you visited. And this is my 42nd out of 50. So there are a few states I have not visited yet. So before this trip, I had not been to North Dakota. Another state I have not visited is Hawaii. Oddly enough, no one invited me to come and give a lecture in Hawaii, so I got invited to come here, and I figured North Dakota is pretty much the same thing as Hawaii, so I'll come here. But it's nice to get to see all of you and to talk tonight about entrepreneurship. I do appreciate the center inviting me out, and I would encourage you to take a look at the programs and activities of the center if you're not familiar with them. If you need any help filling out the comment cards, just come see me afterwards. I'll help you with the comments on the speaker. Usually I hand them out already filled out just to make things easier. I want to talk tonight about entrepreneurship, but in a fairly broad sense. I want to talk about the relationship between entrepreneurship and economic growth. And I want us to think about economic growth, not just in sort of a narrow technical way, looking at GDP and so forth, but in a broader way, because really what we're all ultimately interested in is, as was mentioned in the introduction about the center, human flourishing or human well-being. right? If I were to ask you students, what are your goals after graduation? Well, you want to get a good job, and some of you would say money is your main motivator, but most of you wouldn't, right? You want some kind of life satisfaction, you want happiness, you want fulfillment, you want to live, sort of live the American dream, whatever that might look like. Most people want, they want a certain amount of economic security, right? But they want more than that. They want strong social ties. They want to be part of a family and do all the things that the people in this graphic that I downloaded from Google Images are doing, like there's having little kids on your shoulders and all that kind of stuff. So this is a generic picture of living a happy life, okay? Most of us are fortunate in the Western world and in the United States. Well, we may not live exactly like this, but most of us are pretty well off economically compared to people in other parts of the world, right? A lot of people in the world live like this, right? So, I mean, they're not even thinking about life satisfaction and feeling fulfilled and making a difference the way you guys are. Most of them are just thinking about where the next meal is going to come from. And it's sort of interesting, when we see pictures like this, we normally think, well, what happened to them? I mean, what went wrong for a society to sort of devolve or degenerate into these kinds of conditions? But really, that's the wrong way to look at it, right? Because for most of human history, all of us were living something like this. In fact, what's sort of surprising and unique and needing to be explained is how any societies, any communities ever broke away from sort of a bare subsistence level to live in the kind of modern industrial society that we have now. Sometimes growth can be very rapid. You've probably seen some of these pictures comparing then and now for certain communities that have grown very rapidly in recent decades. So this is Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong in the 1920s was basically a fishing village. Hong Kong has a very good natural harbor, and there was trading activity in Hong Kong, for many years, but it was only in the modern era, because of its particular sort of set of institutions, that Hong Kong became one of the world's great metropolises. This is a picture from 1990, right around the time of independence, of when Hong Kong was returned from being a British protectorate to China. Even more rapid case, look at Dubai, right? I mean, there was pretty much nothing in Dubai as recently as 1990. And then you fast forward to the modern era. You've probably seen pictures of Dubai. It's like something from a sci-fi movie, these fantastic skyscrapers. If you saw one of the recent Mission Impossible movies where Tom Cruise is running down the side of that building, that's the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is the world's tallest building. Maybe you've seen, some of your professors might have shown you this picture, maybe you've seen it on the internet, of the Korean Peninsula at night. So right in the middle there is the 38th parallel, the line that divides North Korea from South Korea, right? South Korea has an economic system that's not too different from the one that we have in the US. It's a modern, industrialized, market-based economy. North Korea has a very different kind of a system, an oligarchic, communist economy. And one of the interesting consequences of that is they don't have any electricity, or they have very little electricity. I mean, North Korea is so impoverished that essentially they have to turn all the lights off at night, whereas South Korea at night is lit up the way a European or North American city or Japanese city or many Chinese cities now would be lit up at night. Okay? One of the interesting things about the comparison between North Korea and South Korea, it's different from comparing, say, the United States with some country in sub-Saharan Africa, where you say, well, you really can't make an apples-to-apples comparison. Those are societies with completely different backgrounds, completely different geographies, different histories, different cultures. You really can't compare the two. But if you look at the Korean Peninsula, right, same culture, same ethnicity, same religious background, same history, right? One system has capitalism and one has communism. Aside from that, they're very much the same. So how do we get from a situation like they have in the North to a situation like the one they have in the South? As I said, until fairly recently in human history, all of us lived pretty much at a subsistence level. Again, I'm taking liberties with, looking for cool pictures online, so some illustration of what people might have looked like, but I don't think that's necessarily historically accurate. But my point is, we all used to live kind of like that, and then some societies somehow broke out of it. In fact, if you look at economic growth over time, the pattern is actually pretty remarkable. Here's a famous economist named Angus Madison has tried to kind of reconstruct statistics on things like GDP per capita, gross domestic product per person, going way back in history. And so here are his estimates of what per capita GDP was like in the world, right, from the birth of Christ until the modern era. And what you can see is that the standard of living measured by GDP per capita, right, was pretty much the same from the year 0 until about 1000 AD. Okay, so there was very little change in living standards up to that time. Then all of a sudden you got an increase in economic growth, right? You had what historians call the sort of agricultural revolution, and later the scientific revolution, and finally by about in the 18th century you get the Industrial Revolution, right? The Industrial Revolution kind of takes a bad rap sometimes, especially people who are sort of environmental groups and so forth. They say, oh, well, the Industrial Revolution gave us all this pollution, and we cut down too many trees, and children had to work in the factories and so forth. I mean, and of course, those things did happen, right? But look at the phenomenal increase in living standards. And this is just GDP per capita, but you could also, if you had a way to put on a graph, lifespan, resistance to disease, all sorts of measures of basic human comfort, nutrition, and so forth, you would see, for most of human history, it's very flat. Then you see a little bit of increase. Then it shoots up very dramatically. And so it's only relatively recently that we've come to have the kind of societies that we have now, right? We all take it for granted. You listen to the radio or watch TV, or you see something online, and such and such economist says economic growth is only going to be 2.3% in their latest forecast. Everybody says, oh man, how are we going to make it? The economy's only growing by 2.3%, right? In most of human history, the growth rate was 0%. Of course, these are averages, so you had sometimes things got a little bit better and sometimes things got a little bit worse, but we're all accustomed to rapid change. It's funny when you look at, when Apple introduced the new iPhone last month, there was a lot of hype about the iPhone 10 or iPhone X. I don't know what you're supposed to call it. Have you seen that one? It's like $1,000 if you buy it unlocked, and it has the screen that goes all the way to the edges and all that. But most of us won't get that. Right, a lot of people will get the sort of normal new iPhone. I guess it's iPhone 8. And a lot of I was reading some articles about this, and you could detect this kind of tone of disappointment. It's like, well, compared to iPhone 7, it has a little teeny bit more memory, and it has a little teeny bit faster processor, a few more bells and whistles, but it's really not that much better. And people are disappointed, right? We've come to expect, especially with our gadgets, that they're going to get much, much better every year. Well, why should we expect that? I always joke with my students. Think about your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. In the year 1200 or something. He's out there plowing in the field, maybe a hand plow. If he were wealthy, maybe he had a horse or an ox or something that could pull the plow. And he pulls up by the fence, chatting with his neighbor. It's like, ooh, I like your plow. Have you got plow 2.0? I'm still using plow 1. Right? Well, 2.0 is in beta right now, but no, I mean, everybody used the same plow for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was no plow 2.0. It was just a plow. Of course, there were advances in plowing technology, to be sure, but not every 6 months, right? Not every year. It wasn't the kind of technological progress that we're accustomed to. By the way, if you think these kind of charts are maybe unique to the West, if you think they're unique to like Europe or something, they're really not. Here's a version that plots the same kind of a diagram for England, Japan, and China. And you can see that they all exhibit the same basic pattern, right? Flat, a little bit of economic growth, and then a takeoff. So we want to understand what lies behind this takeoff, right? How do we get from a society in which people are just barely getting by to the kind of society we have now? And the sort of argument I want to offer tonight is that what's ultimately driving these improvements in the standard of living, improvements of well-being, is entrepreneurship. It's entrepreneurs who are creating wealth, entrepreneurs who are figuring out new and better ways of doing things, who are driving these improvements in technology, in organization, in management, in marketing that create the kind of wealth increases that we all are used to. Okay, so what do I mean by entrepreneurship? Well, if I just say the word entrepreneur, what image comes to your mind? Well, for some of you, it might be a small business owner, right? You think, well, an entrepreneur is a person who runs their own company, person who starts their own company. You know, I haven't spent much time, but I'm sure if you walk through downtown Fargo, you'll find a lot of, cafes and restaurants and all kinds of small enterprise. That's, where I live in Waco, Texas, we have a downtown that's similar to Fargo's downtown, and it's been through some hard times over the years, but it's making a comeback, mainly through a lot of small businesses that are opening up in downtown, converting old warehouses and old office buildings and so forth, right? You might think of individuals who start particular companies, right? Not bakeries and cafes, but people who start companies that will go on to change the world, right? Like Steve Jobs, right? Or Bill Gates, or Mark Zuckerberg, or pick your favorite tech entrepreneur, right? So maybe we're particularly interested in those business owners and business creators, founders of companies that will go on to change the world. Now, in developing countries, what people mean by entrepreneurship is often quite different, right? So what about street vendors? Well, I mean, these are typically business owners. These are people who own their own companies. Right now, these gentlemen right here, they probably are not realistically expecting to be the next Steve Jobs, and are probably not expecting their vegetable stand or whatever it is to change the world the way Apple's products have changed the world. But, if you think of entrepreneurship as self-employment, well, these guys are probably self-employed. They may not be self-employed by choice. Right? In an economy without many employment opportunities, self-employment may be the only alternative. There's an old joke that people tell in this field. This guy's talking to his friend. He says, hey, what made you decide to be an entrepreneur? The guy says, well, something my boss said to me one day. Oh, yeah, what's that? You're fired. So maybe these people are self-employed because they don't have any alternatives. Right? Maybe you think of an entrepreneur who's sort of I would call this political entrepreneurship. Our talk is sponsored by a center that focuses on the interaction between politics and economics. You guys know who this is, right? Yeah, Elon Musk. Right? I mean, Elon Musk is, of course, producing the Tesla, and he does SpaceX and Solar City, and he has all these crazy schemes like the Hyperloop. Have you heard of the Hyperloop? And he's going to put colonies on Mars and do all kinds of stuff. I mean, Elon Musk has a lot of admirers, but also a lot of critics who say that all of his businesses are subsidized in some way by the taxpayer. He's very good at finding industries where you can get big government subsidies, like electric cars, for example. And maybe he's good at finding those places where you can get government subsidies, but maybe that's not the kind of entrepreneurship we want to encourage. So, I mean, there's words like entrepreneur and entrepreneurial and entrepreneurship are used in many different ways in many different contexts. Sometimes it's hard to come up with a precise definition. It can be confusing. Well, fortunately, I can recommend some excellent books to help alleviate your confusion. Just to pick two completely at random, you might want to look at The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur by Peter Klein, or Organizing Entrepreneurial Judgment, also by Peter Klein. How about that? I will tell you, if you get a copy of the book on the left, The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur, I can guarantee that you will get at least your money's worth. I can guarantee you will not overpay. And the reason I can offer this guarantee is because you can get the ebook version for free. If you go to the Mises Institute website, mises.org, you can download an electronic version of this book for $0. I guarantee you will not get less than $0 worth of benefit. Okay. But to be a little bit more serious, my 2012 book, as was mentioned, Organizing Entrepreneurial Judgment, is one of the books that the student group here at NDSU is reading. The student group associated with the center is reading that book this year, along with a biography of some Steve guy. I don't know who he is, but this is probably the only time you'll see my name and Steve Jobs' name in the same slide. So what exactly is entrepreneurship then? I mean, what are some ways to think about entrepreneurs and what they do and who they are? Well, many people think of entrepreneurship as what I call an outcome or a phenomenon, meaning something that you can see and touch, smell, count, collect data on, right? For example, self-employment. Okay? If we define entrepreneurship as self-employment, well, we know if somebody's self-employed or not. We can just ask, or we can look at them. It's kind of like, you fill out some form, like the census form or something, and it asks, where your age and ethnicity and religion and so forth. Then it asks you, what's your occupation? Doctor, lawyer, taxi driver, entrepreneur, plumber, teacher. So wait a minute. So that just means, well, my job is I work for myself. Okay? One of the advantages of this definition of entrepreneurship is we can easily measure it and compare it, right? You want to say, well, which state is more entrepreneurial, North Dakota or Minnesota? Well, if we know that the self-employment rate in North Dakota is, 15% and the self-employment rate in Minnesota is only 13%, we can say, North Dakota is more entrepreneurial. Okay. Maybe we want to measure the number of new companies created. Might define entrepreneurship as new venture formation, or maybe it has something to do with technology, right? How much research and development do different firms do in a particular town or place? How many patents do people file? Those might be measures of entrepreneurship. Again, they're the outcomes of behavior, and they're things that we can see and we can count and so forth. Now that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with defining entrepreneurship in these ways. However, if you think about the sort of ordinary language definition of entrepreneurship, there's some things that don't seem to fit. Right? In everyday language, we often associate entrepreneurship with a kind of a personality type. Right? Someone who has a lot of creativity, someone who's very bold in decision making, someone with a lot of imagination, or somebody who has a lot of initiative. You know that expression, that's so-and-so is the kind of person who, grabs life by the horns. You know that expression, I don't just sit back and let life happen to me. I make things happen. I exercise some initiative. I go out and I see something I want, I grab it. We sometimes use the language of entrepreneurship to define that personality. Just to give you one example, I've got two teenage boys, and my 16-year-old is like other 16-year-old boys, his major interests in life his major activities are Xbox and eating. Okay, I mean, girls is probably on the list somewhere, but Xbox and eating is pretty near the top. And teenage boys can eat a lot. They can eat huge amounts of food without gaining weight, like some of us do. And a lot of times I'll be at home. I have a little study, in my house. I'll be working away at something, and I'll hear this voice coming from the other side of the house. Dad, you need to go to the grocery store. There's nothing to eat in the house. Okay, is it literally true that there's nothing to eat in the house? No. Right, what he means is there's like not a sandwich in his mouth at that very moment. Okay? So, what I'll usually do is I'll say, no, I'm busy. Go look around. Be entrepreneurial about it. Again, I don't mean, quit school and start a technology company, right? What I mean is, he wants like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, if he goes into the kitchen and looks around, there's bread over here, and there's peanut butter over here, and there's jelly down here, and there's a knife over here. And if he seeks out those ingredients and combines them with human labor, he can produce a sandwich that he can then eat, right? So we might say Dr. Jackson is a very entrepreneurial professor because he started up this center and this program, right? He didn't just sit back and take what the university gave him. He created new stuff. Okay, the problem with that notion of entrepreneurship is that it doesn't map exactly into self-employment, new venture formation, R&D, patents, et cetera. Right? It's a little bit squishier. It's not as easy to measure. It's not something we can necessarily observe. Which state has more creativity and boldness and imagination and initiative, North Dakota or Minnesota? Of course, you would say, yeah, North Dakota, of course, it's obvious. Right? But how would you show that with numbers, or how would you convince somebody who doesn't already know the truth? It might be hard. Now, how many people are economics or ag economics or agribusiness majors? So if you talk to economists, and if you read some of the classic literature in economics on the entrepreneur, you actually get even a different story. For example, if you read a famous book by Israel Kirzner called Competition and Entrepreneurship, you get a definition of entrepreneurship as alertness to opportunities for profit or for gain. So according to Kirzner, in any real-world market setting, there's sort of gaps in the market. Like, wouldn't it be great if somebody produced a product that does X? Nobody's currently doing that. Hey, I can step in and fill that gap. And if I'm the first one to realize you can make money from producing and selling X, then I'm going to be the one who gets that profit. Other people will miss it. Okay? Another famous economist, Joseph Schumpeter, defined entrepreneurship as novelty and innovativeness, right? The act of doing something new, doing something differently from the way it has been done in the past. In my own work, I have been attracted to yet another definition of entrepreneurship from the famous economists Frank Knight and Ludwig von Mises that defines entrepreneurship as organizing factors of production under conditions of uncertainty. Okay? The term that Frank Knight and Ludwig von Mises used for this concept is, which I'll talk about in just a moment, is judgment. The notion of judging the future, judging the uncertain future. And that's the major theme of my 2012 book that I showed you before. Mises puts it this way. Mises says, it is impossible to eliminate the entrepreneur from the picture of a market economy. The various complementary factors of production cannot come together spontaneously. In other words, automatically. They need to be combined by the purposive efforts of men. This is written in the 1940s, so forgive the gender not neutral language. Of men aiming at certain ends and motivated by the urge to improve their state of satisfaction. In eliminating the entrepreneur, one eliminates the driving force of the market system. So the entrepreneur, in Mises' understanding of economics, is the very force that drives the market forward. In other words, we got all kinds of stuff around us. This is some kind of a laser pointer, clicker kind of a thing, right? How did it come to be here? I mean, now I just walked into the room and there it was. right? But as a society, we didn't just wake up one day and these things were sitting around, right? Somebody had to exercise the initiative to try to make this thing, right? To buy the plastic and the metal and the electronics and so forth, to source all the materials and hire labor and maybe set up a business, get a business license and go into production, hoping that once these things are produced, they could be sold to consumers or universities or whoever buys them, right, at a price that more than covers the cost of production. But that wasn't known for certain when certain individuals started trying to produce these things. Okay, somebody's got to do that stuff. It doesn't just happen automatically. And according to Mises, the actors, the agents who are coordinating the production of goods and services in an economy are the entrepreneurs. And without them, you don't have a market system. Now, a couple things to notice about this understanding of entrepreneurship, right? It's a very general feature of the market economy. It's not limited only to certain kinds of firms or certain kinds of products, right? It's not only limited to small firms. It's not only limited to people who are self-employed. It's not only in the technology sector. I mean, I used a technology example, but the same would apply to a chair or a ball bearing or an article of clothing or any good or service that's produced on the market. So Mises is challenging us to broaden our notion of the entrepreneur. So yeah, it includes Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, but it also includes the small business owner of the cafe. It also includes the street vendors. But it also includes business owners, right, who are managing ongoing businesses, mature industries, producing kind of low-tech products, right? It incorporates them as well. So to be just be a tiny little bit more technical, but not super technical, right? In this understanding of entrepreneurship, where does profit and loss come from? Well, if you imagine a world with no uncertainty, imagine a world in which, we sort of always know what's going to happen tomorrow. We kind of repeat the same actions over and over again, like for you old-timers in the room, like Groundhog Day, that Bill Murray movie, right? He wakes up every morning and lives the same day over and over again. Your grandparents watched that movie in the theater. Or some of you might remember that Tom Cruise movie, that sci-fi movie, what's it called, where Edge of Tomorrow. Do you remember that? They're fighting aliens in the future, and every time he gets shot, it resets the day. Do you guys remember that movie? Imagine a world where we sort of live the same day over and over again. In other words, if you're a producer, you know exactly what consumers will buy. You know exactly how much they'll be willing to pay for things, right? If everybody knows that, because there's no uncertainty about the future, we just live the same day over and over again, right? Then all entrepreneurs, anybody who wants to go into business, they'll be sort of competing against each other for the ingredients, the inputs that are used to produce stuff that will then be sold on the market. But everybody knows what prices these goods will fetch, right, for sale. Everybody knows the total revenues from selling clickers, and so nobody would pay more for an input into the production of a clicker than what that input is worth on the margin, right? Those of you econ students, no one would pay more than the marginal revenue product, maybe with some kind of time discounting, right, for a unit of a good or service. So in a world like that, every factor of production, land, labor, raw materials, and so forth, will earn just exactly its discounted marginal contribution to the firm's revenue. Right? Now, people who own firms will have some income. Right? They'll earn a sort of an implicit wage, like the opportunity cost of not working for somebody else. Right? And if production takes time, they'll earn some interest return. If they pay, for example, if they pay workers today, but they don't realize the sale of the product until tomorrow, they don't realize the revenues from the sale of the product till tomorrow, then they're basically paying the workers in advance, and it's like they're making a loan to the workers, and so they'll get a little bit of an interest return because they'll pay a little bit less than the actual marginal revenue product because they're paying it up front. But there are no profits and losses, right? There's no profits and losses because there's nothing left over. All of the revenues go out to the factors of production and the owner's implicit wage and interest payments, okay? In the actual world, in other words, where we don't live the same day over and over again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, it works like this, right? Entrepreneurs are competing for factors of production based on their knowledge and their beliefs about what's going on right now, right? Can you actually make these things? How much plastic do you need? How much metal do you need? How many hours of labor and so forth? Their understanding of technology and so forth. But more importantly, their expectations or beliefs about the future. How much will people actually be willing to pay for these? How many of these can I actually sell once I bring them to market? Well, when you start production, you don't know that. You only find that out later. Okay, so those entrepreneurs who are good at anticipating future market conditions will be able to acquire factors of production at prices below what those factors will eventually be worth once goods and services are sold. Right? In other words, entrepreneurs who are good at anticipating the future can make profits because they know better than other people what consumers will actually be willing to buy once goods and services are produced. Those entrepreneurs who are not as good at anticipating the future will end up making losses. They'll buy inputs and put things together and bring them to market, and nobody will buy them because they were not as skilled at anticipating what future market conditions would be like. So some people earn profits, some people earn losses. Right, you look at the smartphone industry. Companies like Apple and Samsung were correct in their anticipations of what types of devices people would be willing to buy. That people would want a large, all touchscreen device. That people would value picture quality, over size and weight. I remember, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you had the coolest phone of any of your friends, it was because it was the smallest. There's like a contest to see who could make a phone that was smaller and lighter and, you could fit it in your pocket without anybody knowing you had a phone in there. But of course, that's when the phone had a little teeny tiny black and white screen and just the number keys. Right? BlackBerry made a big bet that people would want screens with a full QWERTY keyboard. That bet turned out not to be correct. Right? So companies like BlackBerry and Nokia, which dominated the mobile handset industry 10, 15 years ago, are basically bankrupt or basically gone. BlackBerry exists under a different name, and the Nokia brand was bought by Microsoft. But those devices have basically exited the market compared to Apple's and Samsung's devices. So not everybody makes money. And so you talk about capitalism. One of the common misperceptions that people have about capitalism is that it's easy to make money. And I don't know if your professors do the same thing, but whenever I hear people say, oh, well, one of the great things about capitalism is the profit motive. Capitalism is a profit system. I always say, well, you're half right. Capitalism is a profit and loss system. And without the prospect of loss, you don't have the prospect of profit either. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about growth, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for some questions and some discussions here. How does all the stuff I just talked about link to economic growth? Well, those of you economics students may be familiar with some of the leading theories about what economic growth consists of and what sort of factors drive economic growth. And sort of conventional economic models, or so-called neoclassical economic models, have tended to emphasize the amount of stuff you put into production. So accumulation of capital and other factors and some kind of scientific and technical knowledge about how to produce things. And countries that grow faster are countries that have more capital, that have more technical know-how and so forth. So-called new growth theory, which took off in the 1990s, right, emphasized more intangible factors, right, knowledge and the ability of people to learn from what they've done before. People like Paul Romer, very famous economist, who a lot of people thought might win the Nobel Prize this year, but he didn't, said that these sort of softer, intangible, knowledge-based features or factors are more important than physical capital and so forth, population growth, et cetera. The so-called new institutional economics, as the name suggests, emphasizes institutions like the rule of law, private property, having sort of uniform practices like weights and measures and means of keeping time and so forth. So legal, political, and social institutions are the key drivers of economic growth. And of course, they're exactly right in cases like the Korean Peninsula, which I showed you before, right? It's the legal and social and political institutions that differ between North and South Korea that explain differential economic progress. Still, there's a need for what you might call better micro foundations. In other words, for all of these theories, these are still kind of at an aggregate level. I mean, how does it actually work on a day-to-day, market-by-market, firm-by-firm basis? How does, for example, endogenous learning actually give us these, as opposed to other sorts of things? Put it this way, if you like. We could say that, well, having good institutions, having the rule of law and secure property rights and so forth, creates opportunities for more investment and more learning and eventually economic growth. But are those opportunities just sort of automatically recognized? Are they automatically acted upon? Well, I mean, that's where the entrepreneur and entrepreneurship comes into the story. So usually people have in mind for micro foundations something like this. Well, if you have good institutions, you get more entrepreneurship. Now, I put entrepreneurship in scare quotes, right? Because usually what people mean when they say that is small business and startups. Come back to that point in just a moment, right? And from these small businesses and startups, you get more innovation, and then you get more economic growth. Okay, that's fine. But we need to look into that story, delve into that story a little bit more deeply. Right? First, why do people care so much about small enterprise? Why do they emphasize small business as opposed to large business? Well, partly it's rooted in sort of particular approaches to development that are very popular today. One of the key words, one of the words you hear all the time in different contexts, talking about growth or anything else, is sustainability. We don't just want growth that's rapid, we want growth that's sustainable, that's predictable, that maintains sort of our existing ways of doing things, that protects the environment and so forth. So people want sustainable economic growth. And usually what advocates of sustainability have in mind is they want something that's not what my friends in community development call smokestack chasing. Right? So smokestack chasing is, you've got let's say there's some rural community in North Dakota and its standard of living is not very high. How do you improve the standard of living? Well, you got to try to attract a factory of some sort. Right? In the old days, it would be a big factory. That's why they call it smokestack chasing. So we got to give tax incentives. We've got to give, we got to build roads. We got to somehow persuade some large company to set up a factory in our town. By the way, this is totally going on. It's not smokestacks anymore, but it's service businesses. I was just listening as I was driving to the airport in Texas this morning to the radio. I don't know if you've heard about this, but one of the largest employers in the Pacific Northwest is Amazon. Yeah, Amazon. Amazon is looking to build to build a second corporate headquarters. And they've announced that they want to do this, but they haven't said where they're going to put it. Guess what's happening? All sorts of cities and communities and states are lobbying Amazon like crazy to build their second headquarters in that town. I don't know if Fargo's in this game or not, but a lot of cities that are the size of Fargo or even smaller are trying to get Amazon to put their second headquarters in their town. They were saying that people are like the mayors of all these cities are putting goofy things on YouTube where they're like singing a song to Amazon. They're sending all this paraphernalia and swag and stuff to Jeff Bezos, sweatshirt with their town's name on it or whatever. Somebody sent, I can't remember what it was, some mayor showed up in front of Amazon's Seattle office, trying to get a meeting with Jeff Bezos and getting hauled away by the security or whatever. But everybody wants a big company to locate in their area because that means jobs, right? Jobs, development, growth. Now, advocates of sustainability say, well, there's a problem with that model, right? I mean, say there's some rural community in North Dakota is economically deprived, and for whatever reason, Amazon decides to put its secondary headquarters in that town. And there's thousands of jobs created, and they build a bigger airport so they can fly Amazon stuff around, and it's great for the local region. But then Amazon goes bankrupt. Could happen. Big companies go bankrupt. Talk about BlackBerry and Nokia, could happen. Or, more likely, Amazon says, well, having our secondary headquarters in this small North Dakota town, that was good because the labor costs were lower, but we've decided we want to go where labor costs are even lower than that. Mexico, China, right? I mean, you can imagine a world where Amazon's growth is largely in places like China and the developing world. Maybe they want to have their headquarters there. So the big factory, the big distribution center, the big headquarters is shut down. Well, what happens then? Now you go back to the low level of economic conditions you had before. Right? The idea is, well, instead of doing that, if we could encourage individuals who already live in that town to create businesses, to start companies, to expand the size of their operations, then we would get a kind of economic growth. It's not as rapid. You're not going to get thousands of new jobs overnight, but it's more sustainable because these economic activities are deeply rooted in the local community rather than coming from the outside. Okay? Well, is that true? I mean, is that a good way to get economic growth? Maybe. I mean, the evidence on sort of sustainable indigenous growth versus growth from the outside is not very clear. It's kind of mixed. Some of you might have heard of this gentleman, Muhammad Yunus. He's a banker from Bangladesh who won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. His company is called Grameen Bank. He's the head of Grameen Bank, which specializes in what they call micro-enterprise. Have any of you studied this in one of your classes? Or micro-lending, micro-credit. So they specialize in making very, very small loans to borrowers in very, very poor countries. So in Bangladesh, a loan might be $20 US. Right? You think, well, why would you need a $20 loan? Why can't you just, whatever you want to buy, just put it on your credit card? Well, they don't have credit cards. They don't have a functioning formal credit system. So the idea was, well, instead of having the World Bank and USAID and all these big organizations try to help these poor countries, what we should do instead, or it's great that companies like Grameen, banks like Grameen, which is a private bank, what they're doing instead is helping the locals become entrepreneurs by giving them better access to credit. The idea was the borrower, and in Bangladesh, the typical borrower is a woman, is a female borrower, that these women, if they could have $20, they could buy a cow, then they could, if they own their own cow, they can produce milk or cheese or whatever, they can sell it, they can improve their standard of living that way. Yeah, that's going to take a little bit longer, than putting a Nike factory in the middle of their town, but it's more sustainable, it's local, it's indigenous, it's a superior form of growth. So these kind of projects have been going on for about 20 years now in places like Bangladesh, and they don't seem to be working very well. There are some positive social benefits from microenterprise, especially just sort of social things. The borrowers have more autonomy and they feel more empowered, and some of these very traditional kind of patriarchal societies, these female borrowers feel like the quality of their life has improved somewhat. But there's no measurable increase in the standard of living, GDP per capita, and sort of the standard measures. We don't see much economic development happening there where microenterprise, where microcredit has been applied the most. And in fact, I mean, if you look at other parts in the world, remember those charts we started with? Economic growth is sort of flat, then all of a sudden it takes off. Well, in all of the places where it's taken off, it hasn't been from microenterprise, it's been from macroenterprise, big companies. right? The Industrial Revolution in Europe was characterized by what kind of production? Factory production, the first large-scale industrial enterprises. Look at the so-called Asian tigers, right? Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. These countries were all very poor until the middle of the 20th century, and they became fabulously wealthy, right? Not from indigenous small-scale enterprise, but from big factories, large companies, large factories, and in many cases, a lot of foreign investment. So it may be that the big factory, the big Amazon headquarters kind of route is the only feasible route to get a sustained increase in economic growth. And I would just point out as an aside here, this is sort of for myself, but also for those of you students, if you've taken an entrepreneurship class, or if there are any professors out there who teach entrepreneurship, I teach those courses. I think there's a little bit of a danger that when we describe entrepreneurship, especially to young people, we want to sell you on the virtues of entrepreneurship, which is great. But I always worry as an entrepreneurship professor, I worry about the following scenario. A student comes in my office, we're shooting the breeze, like, hey, what are you planning to do after graduation? And I'm thinking, she's going to say, well, I want to be the next Elon Musk. Because in your entrepreneurship class, I learned about companies like Tesla. But instead she says, well, my dream is to work for General Motors. And I go, okay, great. I mean, I don't do that, I think. I hope I don't do that. But I worry a little bit that in the entrepreneurship community, we kind of do that. We act like, well, hey, if your goal is to work for an existing company, oh, I'm so sorry. Best of luck to you. Have a nice life. Right? But I mean, really, there's nothing sort of morally more virtuous about starting your own company or being self-employed than working for somebody else. I mean, it's completely a personal, subjective choice. Neither career option is more virtuous or less virtuous. But when we talk about the benefits of entrepreneurship, talk about some of the advantages of autonomy and so forth that entrepreneurs often experience, I don't want us to act like that's somehow morally superior to any other activity. Okay, so just to sort of wrap it up, entrepreneurship is the key to economic growth. Okay, entrepreneurs are the agents who organize production under conditions of uncertainty, who exercise judgment about future market conditions, right? But it doesn't follow from that. I don't mean by that small business is better than large business, or that new companies are better than old companies, or high-tech companies are better than low-tech companies. They're all good, right? They all contribute to well-being. They all contribute to economic prosperity. Now, we didn't talk a lot in the lecture, but we can certainly discuss in the Q&A if you want. There are a lot of government policies that are marketed as, policies to increase entrepreneurship. What they typically mean is policies to help small business, which is fine. If you have you design the tax code to reduce the tax rate on small business. You give out subsidized loans or other special programs to help small business. That's fine, great. You're going to get more small business. But are you getting the right kinds of small business? There the evidence is not very clear, right? I mean, at the economy-wide level, industrial policy where the government chooses certain sectors. The government says, oh, solar, that's a good industry. They're green. We like solar. It's cool. So we're going to invest a huge amount of taxpayer money in boosting up the solar, helping the solar industry. I mean, history has shown that top-down development policy, where the government picks industries and firms and technologies, has never been successful. Government actors they have neither the knowledge nor the incentives to get those decisions right, and we end up getting stuck with technologies that government actors prefer, which are not necessarily the ones that generate economic well-being. So entrepreneurship, and what before I called the functional sense, right? Being alert to opportunities for gain, showing novelty and creativity, exercising good judgment or decision-making under conditions of uncertainty, right? that does require a certain kind of institutional environment. But it doesn't require subsidies, it doesn't require special tax treatment, it doesn't require infrastructure spending and so forth. All it requires is economic freedom, right? The right of individuals to experiment with different business activities, right? And a culture that, supports entrepreneurs when they're successful, but also tolerates a certain amount of experimentation and failure. Right? So you need a bankruptcy code that allows you to move resources from unsuccessful uses to more successful uses. You need a culture in which there's nothing, it's not shameful to have tried something different and it didn't work out. Okay, great. A learning experience, get right back on that horse and try something else. So the kind of institutional environment we need is one that supports economic freedom, that allows people to act in the marketplace, to compete against each other, to try different things, and to sort of let the chips fall where they may. That's the kind of public policy towards entrepreneurship that I think we can all support without reservation. So thank you very much for your time. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A for anyone who would like to follow up.